theories, he was always aware of the problems of the theory.
The problems?
Of the theories. Was always aware, okay, that always he was not an ideologue of himself, of his own theory. You understand what I mean? He was not an ideologue. Means I have, an ideologue is like a zealot. It's like somebody who says, this is the truth, and this is the ideologue. That's the ideologue. He was never an ideologue of his own theory. Never. And so, as he was developing the theory, he was critical of it as well. Himself is. Wicksell is also the best expression of neoclassical socialism. Because neoclassical economics is not right-wing. It's presented as right-wing today because of this story of wages that I showed you. Right? So it is presented as alternative to Marx because prices are not determined. Everything is determined in terms of prices by supply and demand relations. So there is no class aspect, there is no conflict between wages, profits, and all that sort of stuff. And also because of the question of labor here, the wage. So it has been appropriated as an expression of the theory of the capitalist market. But that was not, Marshall was not right-wing, Wicksell was not right-wing, Walras was not right-wing. Walras was socialist in his idea, but they were not Marxist. They were not Marxist socialists. You understand? But socialists, you can be socialist of all kinds of socialists. Mormons can be socialists, but they are communists, Mormons. The religious group in the United States, in Utah. Yeah? They can be, they are communistic, right? They put everything together. They have a communist society in their view, but they are not Marxist. Huh? They don't have a materialistic conception of society, the Mormons. So, Wicksell was a typical non-Marxist socialist, okay? And for them, neoclassical economics was the best way to articulate the non-Marxist socialist view. But why? Because in neoclassical economics, if perfect competition prevails, perfect competition means no one has power over somebody else. You understand? Under perfect competition, there is no difference in the power between capitalist and worker. In fact, there is no capitalist, there is no worker. Everyone is capitalist and worker at the same time. You follow me? Why? Because in neoclassical economics, everyone owns endowments. Endowments, it means a stock of something. Stock of knowledge, stock of ability to do things, So, the capitalists have capital endowments. So they can organize production, they can bring a machine, they have these skills, For instance, they are in a sense middlemen. Like you go to a real estate agent, if you were to spend all your time, looking for so many apartments and finding out how many in the apartments which are available, so you have to look around or look at the newspapers or on the internet and look rent. Yeah, you have to spend a lot of time. You don't want to spend time, you go to the real estate agency and they will organize it for you. So in that sense, they are middlemen. So the capitalists are middlemen between factors of production, between machine and labor. Do you follow me? Between your skills and my skills, okay? So people have, these endowments are treated equally, but only in perfect competition. They are treated equally. So you have language endowment, I have nonsense endowment, So you need language endowment, for instance, for advertising. For advertising or for announcing something, you need some nonsense and language. You want to do many languages. I have the capacity to generate nonsense, and somebody else has the capacity to express himself in a number of languages. Well, we bring these two endowments together, right, these skills together, and we generate a good publicity or something for a play, for a theater, or also for a product, and so forth. That's the role of the capitalist, to give us also to advance the money, to do all this sort of stuff. The money is not advanced because the capitalist is rich, because the capitalist can organize the finance through the banks and so forth, through the market, you know. But under perfect competition, no one has power over another person. You understand? So the capitalist can fire the worker, and the worker can fire the capitalist at the same time. You follow? Because in fact there are no capitalists, no workers. There are people with endowments, with stocks. We own. Everyone owns something. Okay? And we own our skills, our capacities, and so forth. And if we allow perfect, if we enable the system to be perfectly competitive, then these factors will meet in the market, but there will not be a power of one over the other. You understand? But by the way, what I'm saying that Varras, for instance, he was extremely clear about this, because he said, in the areas where you cannot establish perfect competition, you should have full nationalization. Yeah, Varras. That's why Varras was not given the job in France, because France is corrupt. Right? So, especially France of Napoleon III, of the beginning of the Third Republic, was after was completely corrupt place. So, faculty of economics did not exist; they were in law. And the department of laws were connected to big landowners, the big banks, and all that sort of stuff. And Varras argued that the two things over which you establish scarcity, you establish absolute scarcity, absolute control, and there cannot be competition, and therefore have to be nationalized, are land, obviously you can establish monopoly over land, therefore you cannot have competition. And the second thing that you establish monopoly over is credit, is money. Money is through the banking system. You can create monopolistic banks, and therefore he argued for the complete nationalization of land and banks. And this, the Varrasian view, Varras view, created a lot of problem for Varras in France. He could not get a job in France. He went to Lausanne. So, Vixel's similar case to Varras is a similar case to Varras. And actually the first theory, formal theories of socialist planning did not come from Marxian or Marxism after Marx. They came from neoclassical economics. They did not come from Marx. In fact, the first person to develop a socialist planned economy is an Italian army colonel, or became general perhaps later. He also became professor of mathematical economics and mathematics at the University of Rome. Okay? Enrico Barone. He was in 1916, he wrote an article which is called The Ministry in Italian, The Ministry of Production in the Collectivist Economy. Okay? And that's a complete application of neoclassical analysis to the problem of socialist planning. The first full model of socialist planning, il ministro della produzione dell'economia collettivista. the Ministry of Production, and it's a classic. It's classic in that sort of stuff. So one has to be very careful in defining neoclassical economics as being right-wing. Do you follow me? Today it is, by and large. Not Stiglitz is not. Yeah? Because of this notion that if you are because of the stupidity of economists and policymakers, because it tells you that if prices are flexible, everything is flexible, right? And the one thing that there is if the issue was about flexibility of oranges or car prices or telephone or mobile phones, people would not necessarily object to it. The problem is, the objection arises is when you start saying that everything has to be flexible wages, okay? That you look at, in terms of unemployment, you cure unemployment with flexibility, right? Which means firing people, which means may mean reducing wages. You reduce wages, it's bad now, but wait a bit, it'll be fantastic, you know? And fantastic later. It's when it comes to labor flexibility that they apply the notion of price flexibility to labor flexibility, then it becomes right-wing. There is no alternative. But why it becomes right-wing? Because the society is Marxist, it's not neoclassical. The society is a Marxian framework, the society, not neoclassical. You understand? I can argue with people about that. The society is not Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher says there is no such a thing as a society. Famous statement by the great Margaret Thatcher. We always have to agree with her because she actually understood what neoclassical economics is about. She said, no, in 1982-83, she said that there is no such a thing as society, there are only individuals.
And families.
Huh?
And families.
Yeah, in fact, yeah. Yeah, because individually can have a household, let's say individual household. So then the society is not that. The society is class. We can argue sociologically, etc., and have hours of argument, but I'll defend that position that society's class structure is not individualistically structured. So that's why the neoclassical socialist notion is nothing. No. It's not worth much. But it is wrong to argue that epistemologically, that from an epistemological and philosophical point of view, the neoclassics are a part of right-wing thinking. They are not. They are not. They were not, at least in terms of the foundation. Later, it became part of the element to justify market, let's say, free market, that sort of stuff, as they say. I don't know what it is. I don't say anything. So, Big Cell took from Walras general equilibrium, not from Marshall, took from Big Cell, because actually it was same time as Marshall. And in Walras general equilibrium, the problem which is of interest to us now is that Walras attempted to establish general equilibrium, okay, in a very unsatisfactory way, because Walras was quite smart in that understood that competition does not operate at once. You follow me? So he understood, because the notion of competition in neoclassical economics is connected to, you start from given resources, given, like in Marshall, you have a given stock of labor and capital, etc. You start from given resources. You follow me? And competition means that if there are no impediments, and if no one is a price maker, everyone is a price taker. Under perfect competition, you should obtain two things. You should obtain market clearing conditions, all the supply and demand have to be equal, or whatever it is demanded is both. And thanks to the price system, and the second thing is that they retain the view, the classical view, that competition requires uniform rate of profit, uniform rate of return. They call it rate of return. It has to be uniform. Okay? So the same thing as the classics. You cannot have different rates of return and you have competition at the same time. Otherwise, you should ask the classical question: how capital moves from one sector, from one branch to another, right? So if in one branch is higher rate of profit, you should expect capital to move from the lower rate of profit to the higher rate of profit branch. Do you agree with that? So that is retained in Excel, in classical analysis. But Balras, in establishing simultaneous general equilibrium, he could not prove that this simultaneous general equilibrium is also uniform rate of profit. He could not prove that. Yeah? Because there is no reason to assume that you start already with a uniform rate of return. You must show the mechanism by which competition and uniform rate of return through prices generate the overall equilibrium. But you could not be that. You could not be. Okay? In other words, since the economy is made of many branches, there is no reason to assume that as of today, you follow me? There is no reason to assume that as of today, all the rate of returns will be equal throughout. There is no reason that in the building sector, industry, the rate of return will be equal to the soft industry. And so you must show the mechanism, and that he was not able to show. He was not able to show, and that's exactly what Mixel tried to do. That's what Mixel tried to do. So, what Mixel did, he basically, by showing how a long-term uniform rate of return is established, he basically wanted to solve the Balras problem. And in so doing, he built a neoclassical theory of income distribution. That's what the main. So what Mixel says is that when all is said and done, in the final analysis, everything can be reduced to land and labor. Okay, that's what he says. Everything can. So if you have, even if you have a complex oil refinery, for instance, big complex chemical oil refinery, you can reduce it to land, because you need land to build it up. So eventually, at the very origin of capital is land. This is the operation that Mixel does. So he reduces all capital to land. Okay? Number one. And number two, the other factor, he reduces all the different type of skills to labor. Okay? So he builds, therefore, and I suggest you now you read the part of Pazinetti on the marginalist neoclassical analysis. He comes up, therefore, with an output function, production function is called, where output is a function of capital and labor. Yeah? As I said, all the different capital, so capital becomes, because oil refineries, chemical plants, cement, car factories, whatever, they are built on land, and therefore they depend upon the land. And everything is in the sort of ultimate analysis reducible to land. What does it mean? That if capital is therefore equal to land, it means that you treat capital as homogeneous. That's what it is. Because you treat land as homogeneous. You make the assumption, that's the usual assumption that is made in economic theory. They don't make the assumption that you have land Sahara and land Antarctica. You follow me? Where you cannot produce, I don't know, certain things you cannot produce wheat in Sahara, and you cannot produce bananas in Antarctica. You know? So it makes assumption of a common type of land which is homogeneous, in which you can grow essentially everything. Okay? Everything means that you can reduce everything to one commodity called corn. We are going back now to the corn model of the classics, although they want to be in the totally different theory. So land is treated homogeneously, and labor is also treated as being homogeneous to itself. So you have two homogeneous products. These two products are different, but within themselves, they are homogeneous. Okay? These two factors are different, but within themselves, inside themselves, they are homogeneous. Do you follow me on that? So, okay. Then he also argues that total output, okay, must be, as they say in the jargon, must be exhausted, absorbed by these two factors. The total output, so these two factors produce the output, and this output should have no leftover, because it makes no sense to have a leftover. This output is then redistributed to the two factors. So how this output is redistributed to the two factors? According to the way to the return, each factor, by contributing to output, has its own return. Do you follow me? So there will be a return to capital factor, and there will be a return to labor. Do you understand?
Sorry, when you mean that they are absorbed, it's like the previous assumption that they were all consumed? No.
No. Absorb means that you have output is equal to 100. This 100 has to go back to be absorbed, to belong to the two factors. You understand? This output, 100 will go, X percentage will go to factor K, and Y percentage will go to factor L.
Okay, it's not that it's consumed.
No, it's not. No, it's the two factors will have a claim. The two factors have a claim over the output because they contributed to produce it. You follow me? And therefore, this output will have to be, as they say, exhausted among these two factors. We have to be redistributed among these two factors. And what is the criterion for the redistribution? Not normative criteria, the analytical element that makes this redistribution possible. So number one is that there should not be any residual left over. That these two factors, that the output is redistributed over these two factors. Do you follow me? If you don't have any left over, unexplained left over, how come that out of 100 we are distributing only 90 gets redistributed between, say, K and L, and 10 we cannot account for? No, this is excluded. It has to be among these. Just all the 100 belongs to the two factors, right? Because the two factors produced it. The output is a function of capital and labor, and therefore these two factors have a claim over output. They will receive, therefore, X percentage of output and Y percentage of output. Of course, X plus Y has to be equal to 1, right? Because it's either one or the other. Okay. So if we call the rate of return on capital R, small r, like rate of profit, but it's not the classical rate of profit, it's a rate of return. We see R times K is what goes back to the factor capital, and if we call W, let's say, similar to wage, but it's the return on labor. Okay? So, now we have to determine R and W. Okay? We have to, first of all, build a function which is consistent with the view that all the output has to go back to both of them. Because this is an identity, this is a tautology, if I say. So this is not yet a function. I have to show how this output gets perfectly redistributed among these two factors of production. Okay? So now I start to introduce some more assumptions. Okay? Because this so far is just accounting. It's like A plus B, etc. So it doesn't explain. You have to introduce, or except introduce, explanatory elements in it. The first is the assumption that this production function operates over constant returns to scale. In other words, if you double both factors, okay, so if you double capital and you double labor, output doubles. You follow me? The second is that the function, the mathematical property of the function is defined in terms of being homogeneous, and there is an economic reason for that. I'll explain in a second. That is, it's homogeneous of degree 1. When you have a function which is called homogeneous of degree 1, you know, every function you can take the derivative of the function, right? You can take the differential, right? The increment, yeah? So, what is the derivative, the first derivative of, you know, what is the derivative of degree 1? If a function has derivative degree 1, the function is homogeneous of degree 1, the derivative is of degree 0. This is the important element. You see, if you have an increment, okay, an increment, the derivative degree 0 means that when you apply to these two functions, all output is exhausted. 0. The degree 0 means that no left over. You cannot take any further derivative. You see? This is what it means. That you cannot take, there is no left over, therefore you cannot take any further increment. You understand? It's reduced to, so This means that that you operate a classical calculus exercise. Classical, simple, but it's not so simple, but it's straightforward calculus exercise. You take, derivative, you can take total derivative, you know that, and you can take the partial derivative. You follow? Okay? So, first you take, what you do, you take the partial derivative of output relatively to each factor. You understand? So this means that you take the partial derivative of output relatively to capital, and this partial derivative of output relatively to capital is called the marginal productivity of capital. That is, you assume, the operation is this, the logical operation is this, you assume labor to be given. Labor is not changed. Partial derivative means you take only the increment that by keeping everything else constant. That's what the partial derivative exercise is about in every mathematical formulation, in every calculus formulation. So you take the partial derivative of output by assuming that labor stays put, okay, and capital changes. Say there is an increase in the stock of capital. You can take either an increase or decrease, it doesn't matter. But say there is an increment in the stock of capital. So this is, well, it has to be positive, of course, and it is said to be equal to the rate of return. So the rate of return is the marginal productivity of capital. You follow? So we start writing here. Just a bit, everything is too small. Multiply by k. Okay? I'm rewriting this one. Then you do the same operation with labor. Then you assume capital constant, okay? And you take the partial derivative of output relative to labor, and you make it equal to the wage rate, okay? So you do exactly the same thing with labor. No, I'm going to say times labor. So these two derivatives multiplied by the respective factors, they have to exhaust, to absorb all the output. And this happens only if the function is homogeneous of degree 1. Okay? That's what it is. You don't have any other possibility. So this means that all output is distributed to both factors of production according to, these are the marginal productivities of each. And how are these marginal productivities defined? Well, this is the marginal productivity of labor, of capital, and this is the marginal productivity of labor. The marginal productivities are defined as diminishing marginal productivity, because this is also imposed by the mathematical conditions, because the derivative of the homogeneous function of degree 1 is 0. Okay? So it's imposed a further derivative is negative. Okay? This means that marginal productivities become negative. You follow? So you have positive first derivative, negative second derivative. This means that the economy is producing under diminishing returns. You follow me? So the whole economy produces like in a Ricardian length. If you increase output, okay, if you increase output, the increment, the marginal increment is actually diminishing. Total output increases, but from one increment to another, the rate at which it increases is diminishing. So it increases first, it increases say 5%, then it increases 2%, then it increases 1%, it keeps diminishing, okay? That's what it means, okay? Okay, so this is the technical side, the technical part. Now let's come to the economics part, which is connected to that, which is the argument. Okay, let us assume that we have a country, an area, an economic area, a country, and again, I make the assumption for whatever reason, there is one factor that becomes more abundant than the other, relatively to the situation that we start from, okay? So, let us assume, for instance, that capital becomes more abundant. I'm not inquiring later. I will show you why. What may cause capital to become more abundant. So let's now assume that capital, for whatever reason, has become more abundant.
More, sorry?
More abundant, more available. There is more of it. If capital has become more abundant, you should expect the marginal productivity of capital, given labor, okay? Given labor, what happens to the marginal productivity of capital? It falls, right? It goes, yeah, it falls. Right? So the rate of return falls, okay? So if capital becomes more abundant, the distribution of income, of output between capital and labor moves toward labor. If there is more capital as land in the economy, then you should expect the distribution of income to be more in favor, shifting in favor of labor. Because labor has become the scarce resource. But this means that the distribution of income and the price of the factors is the same thing, right? If capital becomes more abundant, the marginal productivity of capital falls. That's the price of capital. That's what it is. Do you understand? And this means that the marginal productivity of capital is the demand curve for capital. That's what it is. And the marginal productivity of labor is the demand curve for labor. Therefore, the rate of return defines the demand curve for capital, and the wage rate defines the demand curve for labor. They each reflect the respective marginal productivities. So, in a country like, which has a lot of labor relatively to capital, compared to a country which has a lot of capital relatively to labor, you should expect the country where labor is more abundant to have a lower wage rate and a higher rate of return to capital, because labor is more abundant, therefore marginal productivity lower, therefore the price of labor will be lower. So, whereas the price of capital, marginal productivity of capital higher, the price of capital higher. You follow? So the distribution of income number one, in neoclassical economics, as we said, is determined by the supply and demand for the factors of production. Is the supply and demand conditions for the factors of production. The demand conditions are determined, the demand curve is determined by the marginal productivities, okay? And the supply conditions are determined by the quantity of capital or the quantity of labor available in the economy. That's what it is. So, unlike the classics, where the distribution of income is determined by the relationship between the social classes, in neoclassical economics, distribution is also a matter of price. That's all. A matter of marginal productivity, which determines value. You follow me? This is crucial. This is completely crucial. It's crucial for today, yesterday, tomorrow, after tomorrow. It's completely crucial that you understand it.
Sir, can you repeat what you said about comparing a country with another country if one country has something?
Okay. So if you have a country with a lot of population in it and relatively little capital compared to a country where there is a lot of capital, no matter how you define, now we are not going to the definition. But compared to a country with a lot of capital and relatively less population, you should expect the country with a lot of labor and little capital to have a lower wage rate and a higher rate of return. Okay? Therefore, in the country with a lot of labor and little capital, you have distribution of income in favor of profits of the capital factor. In a country with a lot of capital and relatively little labor, you should expect the distribution of income to be in favor of labor. Okay? But this is analytical, because in the country with a lot of capital, with a lot of labor, the marginal productivity of labor is low. Okay? And the marginal productivity of capital is high. Therefore, the price of capital is high and the price of labor is low. In the country which has a lot of capital, the price of capital is low and the price of labor is high. You understand? And that's it. That's the story. But further step. The further step is this is the rate of return. This is the marginal productivity of capital. Okay? This is the price of capital. Okay? That's the price of capital. So the rate of return to the factor is also the price of that factor. Similarly, this is the wage rate, this is the marginal productivity of labor, and this is the price of labor. Okay? Now, over time, there are processes that change the relative endowment. We start always from a production function of this kind. Okay? So, over time, there is no reason why the proportion between capital and labor should stay the same. You follow? So, say that in a particular country there is an increase, more availability of capital. What you expect, this relationship, K over L, well, this means that this relationship goes up. Capital becomes more abundant relatively to labor. You follow? So if for whatever reason there is more land made available, relatively to labor, population stays the same, labor stays the same, you have more land available, the proportion of capital to labor goes up. That's called the technique of production, exactly as in classical economics. Yeah? But this means that the marginal productivity of capital goes down. The price of capital goes down and the price of labor goes up. The overall technique of production in the economy becomes more or less capital intensive. How does it become? What? But if this ratio is gone up, if K over L goes up, then it becomes more capital intensive, right? If you have more land, more capital is like having more land, and then relatively to labor. So, because you have more capital, the marginal productivity goes down. The price of capital goes down. So, the price of capital is inversely related to the technique of production, to the capital intensity of production. Do you follow me? It's inversely. It's simply the operation of relative abundance and relative scarcity. The more a factor is abundant, the less is its marginal productivity. The marginal productivity goes down. Therefore, its price goes down. Therefore, in the technique of production, the capital intensive production moves toward the factor which is more abundant. So this means that the economy will use more capital relatively to labor. You understand that?
So we're using all of that.
That the economy will use more capital relatively to labor. Both factors are fully employed. It's simply that by adding more capital to the system, the marginal productivity of capital will go down, and the price will go down. And relatively, therefore, the wage rate will go up relatively to capital. And therefore, the distribution of income moves toward labor, but the technique of production moves toward capital-intensive technologies. Do you follow me? Okay. So you have the price of capital, which is inversely related to the capital intensity of production. The price of capital goes up when capital intensity of production is low. You follow? If the capital intensity of production for the whole economy is low, it means that capital is scarce. You have a lot of labor, and therefore the wage rate, the marginal productivity of labor is low, and the technique of and the capital intensity is low. Okay? Capital intensity low, price of capital high, because capital is scarce in the economic system. In the case of abundant capital and scarce labor, the opposite. So the price of capital and the capital intensity of production go into opposite direction. Opposite direction, okay? That's the aspect that has to be remembered for theoretical consistency. Then, so I introduced the view that capital can increase, but why should capital increase? I assume that more land is made available, but that's, I just pulled out of my hat, okay, land, okay? Or I assumed, I don't know, I assumed that more land is made available like in 19th century Russia, when they expanded into Asia and Siberia and so forth, but this is ad hoc, this is not theoretically structured. I have to explain why should capital become more abundant. Why? And that's what Mixellity and later that mathematician that committed suicide in Cambridge, Frank Ramsey, at the age of 27, by the way, a very bright mathematician. That was Keynes' mistake, because he was very depressed. Frank Ramsey was very depressed. He was subject to depression. And Keynes said, look, write a paper for me. You're so bright. Write a paper for the economic journal. And he wrote the paper. And after that, he committed suicide. So it made his depression even worse, I gather, right? Because he committed suicide after that. that paper became very, very famous, Mathematical Theory of Savings. It's a completely famous, it's a very famous paper, and in fact there is a book by Blanchard and Fisher, which was published at MIT Press 1988 or 1990, I don't remember exactly, I have that. And that is for many, many years, as perhaps still now, was the major textbook in PhD courses in MIT. The major was 500. And it's all based on the Ramsey model. They start with the Ramsey model and that's it. And it's all development of the Ramsey model. So Frank Ramsey was absolutely essential for modern neoclassical macroeconomics. Although he himself was not, he was not neoclassical, he was not an economist to begin with, he was an economist. But then it was taken by neoclassical economics as absolutely important because it defines the conditions for optimal savings. That's what. So why should capital increase? Why? In the classic, capital increases because of reproduction and accumulation. It's straightforward. Capital accumulation is the objective, the target of economic activity in classical economics. Classical economics is a theory of capitalism, and capitalism is based, that's what they understood, whether Ricardo, Adam Smith, they had one story and another, some had, some had Gordon, some had another, but it's the same. They had the agreement on the essential features that was capital for Ricardo and Adam Smith, it was a natural economy, not capital. Mass becomes capitalist mode of production, but the reference is the same. The economic activity, the objective of economic activity is the capital accumulation. Okay? That's the story of the classics. In the case of the neoclassics, the objective of economic activity is consumption. It's not capital accumulation. They don't theorize a capitalist system. They theorize a system based on individual agency, on individual agents that maximize consumption, they maximize utility. That's where they start from. They all start from there. The rest is added into to be consistent with the view that the agents, the characters in the economic system is made by individuals who maximize consumption on the basis of their utility functions. That's all, on the basis of their utility. So and they have to fit. So first they start with no production, just goods. Then they have to bring in production, and it has to be consistent with this individual methodologically individualistic behavior. It has to be consistent. So the objective in the neoclassical story is not accumulation, it's consumption. Yeah? So why would capital expand except for, the Tsar getting more land during 19th century Russia and stuff like that. But except for but this is not an economic explanation. These are other things. Okay, or why should there be more capital? You start from the individualistic perspective of rational consumers who maximize utility, through consumption. Well, but consumers can also maximize future consumption relatively to the present, right? So we go back to the Austrians, to Bembavet, we go back to the very beginning when I finished classical economics, I mentioned the Austrians that invented the notion of opportunity cost. And so we go back to that. So you would increase more capital if you wanted more consumption in the future. Therefore, you would have more capital only if you saved. Follow me? Mm-hmm. Only if you save. Because if you save, you increase the supply of capital. So savings are equal to the increase in the supply of capital. That's what it is. More capital is made available through savings. This would be a capital, but it all happens instantaneously, simultaneously. So you all look at the end of the process. Project everything toward the end, okay? And so this would mean if markets are rational, and therefore if perfect competition prevails and blah, 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 this would mean that the greater savings are become more capital, because savings is increasing the supply of capital. And when you have an increase in the supply of capital, you have lower marginal productivity. You follow me? So, what is the mechanism that allows savings to become actually operating capital? What is the mechanism? Huh? Exactly. Perfect. It's investment. Okay? Investment means machinery, means that more physical capital. That's what it is. And what is the mechanism that can bring the increased supply of savings, okay, in line with an increased demand for capital, which is investment? What is the mechanism whereby increased savings are brought in line with the increased demand for capital? Because you can have an increased demand for capital, increase that they don't meet necessarily, they don't find each other in the market. They must find each other in the market. Huh? No.
Employment.
Huh?
Employment.
No.
Price.
Rate of interest, who said that? Yeah, rate of interest. Okay, the rate of interest. So what happens is this, so you have more capital, okay, capital goes up relatively to labor. So that would be equal to an increase in capital, okay? This is equal to an increase in savings. This is equal to an increase in investment, okay, to investments. Not increase in savings, this increase is equal to savings, net savings, and this is equal to investment. These are brought together by the rate of interest. It's the rate of interest that makes savings and investment equal. So, the community, so the average consumers, decide to consume more tomorrow, they save. Okay? They save, they create a new supply of capital. Okay? In order for this new supply of capital to be met, you need an increase in investment, an increase in the demand for capital, not an increase in investment. You need an increase in the demand for capital. The increase in the demand for capital is validated by investment. This means investment. And savings and investment are brought together by the rate of interest. Okay? But that's the last step. An increase in the demand for capital, an increase in capital, therefore, an increase in capital relatively to labor. Labor has not moved, okay? Means that the marginal productivity of capital has fallen. Okay? Marginal productivity of capital has fallen. This is the price of capital, okay, which is also has fallen. Okay. And this has to be equal in equilibrium unless you want to introduce informational asymmetries and stuff like that. That has to be equal to the rate of interest. Okay? The new rate of interest, which would have fallen relatively to the previous position. Okay? So, fall in the marginal productivity of capital leads to a fall in the price of capital and is connected to, in equilibrium, it must be accompanied by a fall in the rate of interest. Which means that, I'll come back to that tomorrow, because then we now move to macroeconomics, which means that in the Vixenian approach, that's why Vixen is so important, rate of interest, marginal productivity of capital are the same thing. In an equilibrium, in a perfectly competitive economy, the rate of interest and the marginal productivity of capital are the same thing. This also means that the rate of interest defines two things. That's the importance in neoclassical economics, macroeconomics now. So we move to macroeconomics, kind of in a silent manner. We move to macroeconomics. This means that in neoclassical macroeconomics, the rate of interest performs two roles, two crucial roles. One is that of bringing savings and investment into equilibrium in the capital market, and the other is to define the technique of production. For instance, if I tell you a story, which of course it's not a true story, but it's an idealized story. I tell you that there are two countries, country A and country B. These two countries can be defined by the same production function. They both they have the same production, different endowments, but same production function. Do you follow me? So both countries operate under Y equal to
the second one.
FKL. But of course they will have different K, different L, different size, different amount. But the characteristic of the production function is the same, okay? Subject to diminishing marginal productivities, etc., etc. There are two countries. In one country, I tell you, okay, the rate of interest is high. Relatively, say in country A, the rate of interest is high relatively to country B. You should immediately tell me what the state of capital development in country A is relative to country B.
Fine.
Huh?
Fine.
No? If I say that the rate of capital development I'm talking about, okay? If I say that in country A, the rate of interest is higher than in country B, okay? It means that in country A, capital is
Higher.
less. Capital is?
Less.
Is what?
Higher.
No higher. No. Capital is less available than in country B, because rate of interest high means the price of capital is high, means the marginal productivity of capital is high, means therefore that the technique of production in country A is more labor intensive, not capital intensive. Whereas in country B, where the rate of interest is low, means that it's capital abundant, okay? And the price of capital is low, and as a consequence, the wage rate is high, and the technique of production is capital intensive. In country A, it's labor intensive because capital is scarce and the price is high and the rate of interest is high. In country B, capital is abundant, the rate of interest is low, the technique of production is capital intensive, whereas in country A, it's labor intensive. Do you follow? You should also be able to simultaneously tell me, and I promise to finish here, I want to finish this. You should also be able to say, okay, if these two countries have trade, how will they trade? Exactly. The country where capital is abundant, which is country B, will export capital-intensive technologies, products, and import labor-intensive products, okay? So you can see how, in a very simple way, you can capture distribution of income, international trade, okay, and the state of capital accumulation. You can capture these three things in the Vixenian framework. Okay? Whether it is correct or not, I'm not entering. It's not. It's wrong. But it doesn't matter now. But you see how in your classical theory everything is reduced to price. Essentially, you reduce everything to price. You understand? Because the rate of interest is a price. The marginal productivity of capital or labor is a price. Everything is reducible to a price. Once you define the framework within which you apply the price theory based on diminishing marginal productivities or on diminishing marginal utilities, you are in business. You can apply to everything, development, trade, etc., etc., and you have the whole picture. You can give an answer. You don't even have to read. You don't even have to read or study. You just give the answer. And if the answer does not correspond, the reality does not correspond to what the theory, okay? If you find out that, for instance, China is exporting high technology stuff, which does, is not, then what you say, whereas it should be exporting more labor-intensive stuff, say, then what you say, okay, because there are imperfections, you see? So the correct theory is that the world is flat, okay? But then you say, the world is, but the ship comes back, doesn't fall off, okay? The ship comes back when you send them, or if you want to jog around the world, you come back to the same place. Or you drive around the world, whatever, fly around the world, you come back to the same place. So how come this happens? Only because there are imperfections. The world is imperfect. Okay? You understand? So the world is flat in the theory, and the theory is right. It's a flat theory world. It's a flat world theory. But if in actuality we do not have the things that are envisioned by the theory, this is because the world is wrong. Not the theory. The world is imperfect and therefore it turned out to be round rather than flat. So we have to study the imperfections. And this is Stiglitz. I even wrote a paper years ago about Stiglitz and Woody Allen. Okay, Stiglitz and Woody Allen, like. Stiglitz going to a psychologist, to a psychoanalyst, okay, and actually people like that paper, so it got published in England, and it is precisely this, that it is Stiglitz Stiglitz is a very strong critic of neoclassical, of the way in which neoclassical theory is applied. It's very strong, and I had this paper where I say, well, assume that Stiglitz goes to a type of psychoanalyst like in Woody Allen movies, right? And sits there on the couch and says, look, I dream, okay, of perfect world. A perfect world, supply and demand, a cross, equilibrium, perfect world. However, I know that the world is not perfect, okay? And this gives me nightmares. I would really like the world to be perfect, but I know that this supply and demand don't cross the way in which they should be crossing. It's exactly the same. You talk about, you create the perfect world, and this perfect world is assumed to be the guide for the actual world. Sometimes it may work, but only if you abstract from the real world the necessary elements, like in the map. The map is not something invented with dragons showing up from or sea monsters coming. The maps of the 15th, 16th century, especially 14th century, 15th century, where they did not have seas, oceans that were not known. They would draw, if you go into museums, etc., they would have all sorts of sea monsters coming out of the ocean, right? They were painted in that way. Well, if you do that sort of map, you don't get anywhere. So the map must abstract something which is concrete, not something which is a figment of the imagination, okay? But to understand that, you have to go back to Hegel's dialectics and Marx. There is a dialectic between abstract and concrete all the time in the case of Marx. But of course, these people do not have that, so forget it. Anyway, that's what I wanted to point out. So, in neoclassical analysis, with Wicksell, neoclassical analysis becomes really macroeconomic analysis, in which basically the price determines income distribution, technical production, and also international trade. It's determined. The nature of international trade is determined by the relative factor prices. Okay? So now we can move to Keynes, because tomorrow I do monetarist theory and then Keynes, so we can move to Keynes. Okay. Bye. See you tomorrow.
Are you coming to the third floor? You can leave it together.
So are you going to have a lunch or? Are you going to have lunch?
Yeah, we do normally go to the restaurants nearby and try to buy something there. But as an African, I made my own budget and then I took them to the third floor. But the problem is I don't have time to cook. And the cooker there is just a very little one where many people share and it takes a lot of time before things are cooked. But if you are done, you can go to a restaurant which is a communist one and less expensive. No, he's just going there.
You're supposed to have your physical No, vabbè.
Let's go together.
Huh?
you have to keep.
La casa di però
Scusa, let me just...
poi
Oh, you ruined